I'm delighted that you have a show because you're fresh. You're funny, you're great, and I want you to know something from my heart. I never liked you. Don Rickles was more than just a comedian. He was a stage assassin whose graceful art of the roast made Hollywood both tremble and laugh. But behind the laughter, a bitter truth lay hidden. There were people he genuinely hated and would never forgive. In his twilight years, Rickles unexpectedly pulled back the curtain on a secret he'd kept his entire life, a shocking blacklist. It included a talentless man who lucked his way into politics, an overly wept star who lacked true substance, and even a close friend whose career was directly tied to the mafia underworld. The questions are, why did Rickles stay silent for decades? And what made him choose to reveal everything in the final days of his life? Don Rickles rose to prominence in the 1950s and 1960s, when Las Vegas became America's entertainment capital. With his no-holds-barred, insult comedy, he quickly became one of the most prominent comedians in the country. For decades, Rickles was a familiar guest on major talk shows, especially The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he would unhesitatingly fire away at any star sitting next to him. The nickname Mr. Warmth that the public gave him sounds affectionate, but it was actually ironic on stage. Rickles was anything but warm. He dissected everything from appearance, race, and habits to careers with sharp, biting wit. Yet, strangely, it was this graceful cruelty that made audiences go wild, while his victims still laughed and accepted his attacks. Rickles passed away in 2017 at the age of 90, leaving a brilliant legacy in American comedy. But behind that legend, few knew this. Not everyone he used for laughs on stage was just a joke. There were people Rickles truly despised to his core, and every sarcastic jab was a real knife aimed directly at them. 1. Clint Eastwood, a dazzling but empty icon. While most of Don Rickles' victims came from the political or comedic spheres, Clint Eastwood was a special case. He was one of the few movie stars to become a favorite target of Rickles. 2. Rickles. Eastwood was just a quiet actor with a one-dimensional acting style, yet somehow, he was hailed as Hollywood's iconic man. On a Las Vegas stage, Rickles once delivered a devastating blow. Clint, you have two expressions. One is a scowl, the other is a deeper scowl. And that's how you become a Hollywood legend. The audience roared with laughter, while Eastwood, known for being reserved and serious, only offered a cold smirk. But in Rickles' eyes, that reaction only proved his point. Eastwood wasn't a good actor, but simply a face that knew how to scowl at the right moment. Rickles repeatedly insisted that Eastwood's career was a joke. He quipped, if he'd been born with a wide smile like Sinatra, he'd probably be selling tickets at a carnival now instead of sitting in the director's chair. Or, Hollywood turned a tall, quiet guy into a Western hero. In reality, Clint's only good at one thing, staring until his opponent runs away from boredom. In Rickles' eyes, this was an injustice to truly talented actors whom Hollywood had forgotten. But Eastwood didn't seem to care. That cold demeanor only annoyed Rickles more. Clint, if you get any colder, people will mistake you for a deep freezer. Though neither publicly hated the other every time Rickles appeared, Eastwood knew he'd be the butt of the joke in front of the audience. And every time Eastwood maintained his rigid, stone-like face, Rickles got more material for his vicious jabs. If Clint Eastwood was just a hollow icon in Rickles' eyes, the next person on this list is a completely different story. 2. Dean Martin, the charming icon hiding an alcoholic's true nature. Dean Martin, the right-hand man of the Rat Pack, was the one Don Rickles loved to mock the most. 2. Rickles. Martin was the perfect example of someone who lived on his good looks and superficial humor instead of truly working hard at his craft. In the middle of his Las Vegas shows, Rickles didn't hesitate to call Martin Vegas's highest drunk. The audience roared, but everyone understood that Don Rickles was directly attacking the iconic image Dean Martin had. Painstakingly built a gentleman with a whiskey glass in hand who would sing and flirt with women as if life were one endless party. Rickles despised that. To him, Martin was simply a naturally charming slacker. His singing voice was sweet, but never refined to perfection, and his acting was mediocre, but covered up by a humorous, spontaneous persona. Instead of practicing, Martin chose to hold a drink, smile, and let the crowd delude themselves into thinking they were watching a born talent. Rickles often mocked him to his face. Dean, you don't sing, you just yawn with a melody. Or, you succeeded by drinking more than you sang. If Las Vegas ever runs out of whiskey, your career is over. What frustrated Don Rickles most was that Dean Martin was celebrated by the whole world. At the time, Martin was the soul of the Rat Pack, the powerful group of artists who dominated Las Vegas, while Rickles had to work hard to build his career. All Martin needed was one witty remark to make the entire room go wild. On some nights, Rickles' roasts of Martin were so biting that the audience was shocked. Dean, you're so drunk that if the audience clapped for another minute, you'd think you're in a bar and order another drink. In his final days, Rickles still mentioned Dean Martin as one of the names that annoyed him to the bone. Martin represented the type of artist Rickles hated most, superficiality being deified and laziness being hailed as talent. But Rickles didn't just stop at those who lived by the bottle. To him, Another famous person was even more deserving of condemnation. 3. Ronald Reagan, the talentless symbol who still reached power. In the 1960s, before he was president, Ronald Reagan was just a bellist actor who frequently appeared in clubs. And it was here that Don Rickles found his favorite prey. In Rickles' eyes, Reagan embodied everything he despised. No talent, just a smile, and a mechanical way of reciting lines. Every time Reagan appeared, Rickles was fueled with new energy. Rickles once bitterly stated, "Ronnie, you were so bad in the movies that Hollywood had to push you into politics." Reagan was known for his composure. But those barbs bothered him. Backstage, Reagan once told a close friend that Rickles didn't know when to stop. Their relationship was always strained. Rickles saw Reagan as a master of faking it, while Reagan saw Rickles as an insolent clown who was only good at making noise. When Reagan became president in 1981, Rickles continued his attacks on national television. "Mr. President, I still remember you from those awful films. It's a miracle America chose a character actor to lead the world." For Rickles, Reagan was the perfect example of a bellist actor who transformed himself into an A-list political star. Every time Reagan appeared at a comedy show, Rickles didn't hesitate to fire away. "Ronnie, even the dog Lassie had more memorable roles than you, or you're the only president in history I believe could be replaced by a character actor." The bitter irony was that the more he was mocked, the more Reagan laughed. He saw it as a joke, while Rickles saw Reagan as the embodiment of a disgrace. A failure on screen who was celebrated by the world when he entered politics. He called Reagan the name that disgraced Hollywood, and that was the funniest play of the 20th century. The worst man on screen became the best actor in politics. To Don Rickles, Ronald Reagan was just the first proof that Hollywood could turn a nobody into an icon. And he wasn't the only one. For Frank Sinatra, the lounge king whose empire was built on the underworld, on the surface, Frank Sinatra and Don Rickles were close friends. Sinatra often took Rickles to the most luxurious restaurants in Las Vegas, introducing him to high rollers and casino mogul. Many even said that without Sinatra's backing, Rickles would never have made it out of the small comedy clubs to become a household name in America. But Sinatra was also Rickles' #1 victim on stage. In 1960s Las Vegas, when the mafia still held a tight grip on the casinos, no one dared to cross Sinatra, who was both the king of music and rumored to have ties to the underworld. And while the whole city bowed down, only Don Rickles dared to look up and mock him. "Frank, without the mafia, you'd just be a second-rate lounge singer." The entire room held its breath. People feared Rickles would be taken backstage and handled that very night. But contrary to expectations, Sinatra laughed and applauded. And Rickles became the only person in show business who could insult Sinatra and still walk away. Deep down, Don Rickles both admired and despised Frank Sinatra. In his eyes, Sinatra was clear proof of a power delusion. His God-given voice was undeniable. But Sinatra's legendary status was propped up by the shadow of the mafia and shady backstage connections. Rickles hated success that was built on power instead of pure talent. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to tear off his friend's glamorous suit right in front of the crowd. Sinatra, as always, laughed loudly, clapped, and acted forgivingly. But behind that smile, no one knew if it was truly the generosity of the lounge king or suppressed anger hidden in a glittering glass of whiskey. And if Frank Sinatra was a close but conflicted friend in the lavish circle of Vegas, Rickles' contempt was reserved for another figure, someone who was hailed as a graceful icon, but who in his eyes was a symbol of debauchery and alcoholism. 5. Bob Hope, the man who used laughter to hide his fake. 2. Don Rickles. Bob Hope, an icon of American comedy, was the embodiment of everything he despised in the art of comedy. 2.